It is a big deal, although it wasn't surprising to me, but it was a big deal, beginning with Dr. Kissinger's introduction, reminding Americans and Chinese people that it was the Americans who opened up China in 1971 through the ping pong diplomacy. And there's a history there between Americans and Chinese in terms of cooperation, and then a reminder that reforms was the key to China, to the Chinese economy growing over the last 45 years, and that will still be the key going forward. And to a major extent, that was enunciated again by President Xi, which was a very well-articulated speech that lasted for just 30 minutes, short and sweet, but it was very well articulated because it was a reminder again that the path to more Chinese development and to Chinese being a leader in the world is the path to reforms in U.S. and Chinese-American cooperation going forward.
Yeah, and I can't think of a city or a state that's perhaps more welcoming to Chinese investment than Washington State. That was the verbal stuff, but there's also some written language as well in the Wall Street Journal with President Xi. In an interview, he talked a lot about some of the issues facing China's economy, essentially, I know you've seen this, but explaining to the American audience some of the challenges ahead for China, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I think when you look at, for example, the history of the United States, it's a very short history. So people here, or most people here in the United States, don't have direct contacts with the Chinese population or Chinese businesses unless it's through something that they purchase from China. So to some extent, the speech and the Wall Street Journal interview a couple of days ago is an education for Americans overall in terms of what the Chinese wants to achieve going forward. One thing that he does mention is that to some extent, to a major extent, the Chinese is still a relatively developing country in that GDP per capita is only 1/7 of that of the United States. So there's a long way for the Chinese to go. And the challenge is there. I mean, when you look at how big the ship is, for example, President Xi talks about China as a big ship. As long as it's going in the right direction, which I think it is. I mean, it's a gradual path to reforms.
Let me help you here, because he talked about how big the ship is and how in a big ship, and I'm just translating this for everybody that's watching, is that even the ship, as long as it's going in the right direction, it's going to have its up and downs, basically referring to the waves. I thought that was fascinating. Now, you mentioned a lot of the technology stuff as well, and we've talked a lot on this show about tech firms in China coming to the U.S., and we're talking about potential more and more technology deals. This trend between China and the U.S., where do you see that going in the next couple of years?
I think this is a trend that has to develop going forward. Chinese and American trade is already a mature market. It's already a really big part of both economies. When you look at how much direct investments are being made by the Chinese into the U.S. and vice versa, it's still a very small part of our economies. So there must be a major impetus on both sides to make more direct investments into both countries.
I want to get to something very important. A lot of people are expecting perhaps some announcement regarding the bilateral investment treaty. This is between the U.S. and, of course, China. We haven't heard much about it. There's been some chatter, at least in the political circles. I'm wondering if you have expectations on perhaps hearing some positive news on these discussions.
Yeah, the bilateral treaty, as you know, Phil, is a long time in the making. It's been on the back burner, so to speak, since 2008, when we had the new President Obama administration, when we had the financial crisis. So there are some obstacles to the treaty because the United States, we need a 2/3 ratification by the Senate for that treaty to go through, and it's a very meticulous process. So I don't expect any breakthroughs right now. But as I mentioned before, it's a very important part of our economy. So I hope probably the new administration will do something about it in 2016, 2017.
Let me get to one area that's also been somewhat controversial as well. This is the Yuan exchange rate. Ever since there's been that downward revision to the exchange rate, I've heard both sides of the story, right? You've heard some people complain that this is unfair and this is unprecedented. But then on the other hand, I've heard people say, what's the big deal? It's not a big deal. It's a couple percentage points. So I'm just curious, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, my perspective is the latter. We don't believe it's a big deal. It's like you said, it's only a couple percentage points. The key really is whether the the People's Bank of China will be able to defend the current rate. And I think it could. I think when you look at how much trade China is still doing, it had the second biggest trade surplus just last month. I think there's a lot of support for the yuan at current levels, and the Chinese has the resources to defend the currency rate at this point.